Siv, I'm John Kane, and I welcome you to Let's Talk Native on this Tuesday, March 3rd. Yep, we're into another month. Kind of glad to put that one behind us. While this program may not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do encourage and in some cases start conversations. We kind of break the rules here for Native Radio. We don't do prayers and we don't do buffalo speeches. We take a tough look at history, oppression, and survival. We talk about culture, the arts, politics, and identity. And we may step on a few toes along the way, but our real goal here is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. We will take on the false narratives and provide critical thinking to all that is heaped upon us, and we do it all right here live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. So let's talk Native. But first, let me remind people that our audio streams live on our website, which is www.letstalknative.com. We stream live video of the show on Facebook, via Facebook Live, onto our group page, and share it on a couple of other group pages as well. We take the audio and we put it up as a podcast after the program. We take the video and we put it up on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. You can subscribe to our podcast, and you can certainly subscribe to our YouTube channel, and I'd appreciate it if you did. Look, I'm the show's producer and host, and I'm joined here in studio by Jake Proud, who's managing our audio and our video. And it is my pleasure to introduce Indigenous hip-hop artist. If you don't know him, you will know him after tonight. But I want to introduce you to Dakota Bear, somebody who I think is doing some great work and obviously pushing out some pretty good music too. We'll play a track of his as we go to the break at the bottom of the hour, and then when we end the show later on, we'll play another track. So you'll get a chance to hear some of his music as well. But let me go ahead and introduce Dakota Bear to Let's Talk Native.
Tante, hello. Thanks, John, for having me.
Well, my friend Sogayeta introduced me to you, and I know there's so much happening like right now in the news. I mean, I go back in time. We've had places, you had things like the I Don't Know More movement that got a lot of attention, but between the predominantly the women who have been fighting this pipeline in Wet'suwet'en territory, and then the men throughout Native territories that have been doing blockades, especially in Mohawk territory, but then been blocking the rails and the highways, ports of entry, a lot of that stuff. It has been a bit of an incredible time, and I know that the work that you have been doing, it kind of folds right in with really tackling some of the contemporary issues. So I don't know. You want to give a little bit of a rundown on kind of what you do, where you're located, where you're doing most of your work, and that kind of thing?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm from unceded Treaty 6 territory, Nihiao, from the Nihiao Nation. I moved to so-called Vancouver about 7 years ago to pursue my music. So I'm calling in live from the unceded Coast Salish territories, the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people. This is their land, so I just like to acknowledge that. Mm-hmm. And I've been doing music for quite some time. As of recent, I've been doing a lot of land defense, using my platform to reach the young people. I've been using music as a way to empower, especially our Indigenous youth, to pursue their dreams, but also to really give back to the community, to educate themselves on the history and the ongoing colonialism and genocide that is happening on these lands. I think it's important that we understand how we got to where we are, so we can move forward in a good way and be educated.
Well, it's interesting. The hip hop, rap in general, the urban music is not of our subculture necessarily, and yet we've had quite a few Native people who have pursued careers in hip hop, and I think the most striking difference is And I think many of the black artists who are involved in hip hop, although they make plenty of their social statements and that kind of stuff, they undeniably do a lot of this in pursuit of the money. I mean, they really do. They're trying to make illustrious careers for themselves. But pretty much almost all of the Native artists that I've discussed say, yeah, they're trying to make a career out of it. But there's a purpose and a social message. There's something else that drives a Native hip hop artist that perhaps doesn't drive artists of other ethnic backgrounds. Would you say that's probably true?
Oh, well, you know what? There's all sorts of types of artists in this music industry. I think the struggles that we face as Indigenous peoples on these lands, they run parallel with our relatives south of the Medicine Line, may that be the Indigenous peoples or the African American. You know, marginalized peoples have been using music, have been using hip hop for a long time to tell their stories, but also to create social change and movements out of that. So you can see a lot of the artists that I listen to. I listen to J. Cole. I listen to Kendrick Lamar. You know, I listen to these upcoming Indigenous artists because there's so much talent. And for me, I was really disconnected from our culture, right? I didn't grow up on the land. I grew up in the city. I grew up on the west side of Saskatoon. You know, there's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of issues that we face. I connected with music as a way to express myself and kind of, you know, escape the reality which I was living in and my environment, right? And I feel like the music really was a healthy way for me to cope and to write my story down, to express myself. And so there's artists, you know, they use music, you know, in many different ways. But I think what I can see happening right now is just a lot of people using their platforms, whether that be music, dance, art, to spread that message, to connect, to unify us together, because of course we are stronger together. So I see there's a lot of change happening, and we're doing it through social media. So social media is really a tool that we've been using to connect with each other, you know, to share our stories online. And you can see that, you know, there's a real collective shift in our consciousness as young people, going back to our traditional ways of living, of learning through ceremony. That's what I'm doing with my partner. We have 2 children, and so I just had a son actually. He's a month and a half.
Congratulations!
And my daughter, thank you. And my daughter, she's almost 5 years old. So it's really essential to us and my partner that we learn our language and we learn where we come from, the territories, so we can pass this on to our children, because both of us, we grew up similar, right? There's a lot of alcohol in our homes. There's a lot of, you know, violence that we had witnessed because of that. But it's intergenerational trauma and more direct trauma that we had faced and coping that in an unhealthy way. But we're becoming aware of that as young people, you know, as young Indigenous people. We're becoming aware of that, and we're using our talents and our gifts, you know, to spread that message. And it's a powerful time right now.
Well, and you know, when you bring children into the world, you become a little bit more committed to their future, obviously. And so the whole climate change issue and environmental issues become, you know, for many of us, especially Indigenous people, much more of a concern, and it becomes you know, another thing that we really have to take a strong position on. I know that you've been following some of this this pipeline battle in Wet'suwet'en territory between their fight with British Columbia and CGL and the whole bit, and I'm going to do a bit of an update on that you know, on the second half of the show. But tell me about what you've experienced in terms of, you know, how you've interacted, because one of the things, and I'm actually going to do a video on this. You know, as Native people, we hear all the time on either side of that imaginary line just how nice Canada is. And, you know, as Indigenous people, whether we kind of know the truth that there is a strong foundation of racism that exists on the Canadian side. And we see so much. I've seen major news publications that have had to cancel their online forums because of the level of vitriol and hate that is being spewed on these things. I remember during the Idle No More movement, the Winnipeg Free Press had to get rid of their forum page because they couldn't, it was just getting too ugly and too violent. So tell me about your experience, especially now in light of some of the tensions that have escalated because of this, you know, the blockades, the fight over pipelines, or what Canada calls progress, and what it's like to live where you live and know kind of some of the resentment that's harbored against us.
Yeah, so it's really disturbing, you know, and it's, for me, being a parent, that's why me and my partner, you know, we continue this work to counteract all of the hate that's coming out for our children to be able to grow up in the Canada that is really sold to the rest of the world. The Canada has a great PR strategy, and on the world stage up until recent,
It belies the
they
truth,
have
though.
been
Yeah.
yeah, they have been just telling everybody that, the indigenous nations have been thriving over here. They've been respecting treaties. They would say that to the UN, and really on the global stage until we really exposed that, and we told the truth. And we've been using that social media as a platform to speak our truth. The hate that is coming out, I'm from the prairies. There's so much tension in the prairies when Colton Bushy,
Mm-hmm.
and that had happened. Tina Fontaine.
Well, Colton Bushy again
the-
was shot. A homeowner just came out and killed him in his driveway, basically, and again, the guy, the non-native, the white guy, wasn't prosecuted at all. In fact, he made it sound like it was a justifiable killing. So for the people who aren't familiar with Colton Bushy, and of course Tina Fontaine, is just another name on a long list of women, and I don't want to diminish it. Women who have been murdered or disappeared in this racial environment of Canada.
Yeah, and in the prairies, it's like the racial tension. It's so thick, it's there. And for when that had happened, my mom, her husband, my siblings, they at the time they lived in the prairies, and they could feel it when they walked to the store. They could feel it. They were one of the very few indigenous peoples in the small town that they lived in, and my mom's truck was getting vandalized because of that, because of what was happening. And out here on the coast, we feel that too. We feel the hate. We feel the racism. There is groups that are white supremacy. They're hate groups, and they're really targeting the indigenous youth right now. So-called Victoria, the indigenous youth for the Wet'suwet'en, they have been there occupying, reclaiming space, doing ceremony, and really holding it down while they've been threatened by these white supremacy groups that have been coming to check them out. So if
and people just don't
area,
people don't associate white supremacists with Canada, and that's kind of the truth that folks like you and myself, that we're trying to tell people. Look, you're being sold a bill of goods that isn't true. Canada, and I'm not criticizing the place. I'm saying there is a level of racial tension that exists in Canada that is not just undeniable, it's so prevalent. And one of the things that most frustrating things that I saw recently, and I've seen this before, I've heard people say on this side, oh, if Donald Trump gets reelected, I'm moving to Canada. And I'm thinking, really? You think that's sanctuary from racism, moving to Canada? And I got into this debate, and they just says, well, at least if you block a road in Canada, you don't get shot with rubber bullets and tear gas. And I'm thinking, for one thing, all of that you just described happened during the Obama administration, not during the Trump administration. And I'm not defending Trump by any way, shape, or form. But I'm thinking, man, you better figure out, before you let some white man chase you out of your home, you better just figure out where you're going to first. Because although I have no problem, taking up residency on either side of the imaginary line that's been drawn through our territories, the whole idea of being chased out by whoever the next U.S. president is, and being chased to a place that still has a lot of racial tensions, that you can't escape it by running from it.
No, it's true, and it's all over Turtle Island. I mean, yeah, people. I think right now what is happening too is really bringing that racism and that hatred towards Indigenous peoples to the forefront. And social media, you can see through the comment sections, you can see even through the media, the way that they're manipulating and using media, really weaponizing it to spit out this propaganda to even further encourage violence on Indigenous people, on Indigenous land defenders. And it's really the psychological warfare that has been going on for some time. And you can see it's really creating these tensions, and it's really encouraging that. And so what we've been trying to do is just counteract that, and we're peaceful in our actions, but as young people, we're really aware of that. There's a lot of it out there, But also, I'd like to acknowledge all of the allies, like the settler allies that stand in solidarity with the Indigenous peoples. Their numbers outnumber those hate groups. And you can see that while you're at, the solidarity actions and gatherings in Toronto. What was there, like 10,000 people that were marching? One of the recent gatherings out there, Montreal, out here, we had thousands of people. And it's Indigenous peoples to the front. And our voices, of course, naturally find our way to the forefront of these conversations. But you can see when you look around, a lot of non-Indigenous allies, and that's what we need. That's what we need to encourage for us to continue to standing up together against these injustices, to create that future in the world that we would like our kids to be brought up in. But unfortunately, we're not there yet, and we have so much work to do.
And I've always said that, when people talk about white privilege, and although it's not white privilege is undeniable, for me, when somebody talks to me about it, I says the best thing a person can do who's non-native is to use that white privilege for good. And there's no question that our white allies still, they have to bear the brunt of some of the retaliation and the animosity that some of these hate groups have. I don't know if you saw this, but in one of these Canadian petroleum companies literally took Greta Thunberg's image and turned it into some sexualized sticker that they stuck on some of their vehicles. I don't know if you saw that.
So
thing.
gross.
Yeah, and here's a young girl, who's done nothing but try to create her own platform and expand a platform for people to talk about a lot of this environmental issues. But again. And a lot of this environmental stuff, folds right over, and a lot of this racism stuff folds into the missing and murdered Indigenous women, young men, Two-Spirits. I mean, it's connected, not just because of man camps, but because of just the settler colonial attitude, but the racist and the idea that the racial superiority component to it, and that's where and it contributes to all of it, and of course. The where it gets even more exacerbated is the fact that law enforcement, both U.S. and Canadian policy, doesn't really put any type of priority on the violence that takes place against Native people and Native women in particular.
No, they really don't. And that's why you see there's more patrol groups that are popping up. And you can see that there's more young people, picking up their warrior bundles to go into the streets and, watch over and help protect the young people, the women, because often it's the women on the front lines, the youth that are gathering in these spaces, and the police, RCMP. Well, you have to even research why the RCMP was created in Saskatchewan. When they were selling acres for pennies and Indigenous peoples were on that land, the RCMP, that was their job, to go remove those people from their land. And so the history that we have with them isn't a good one. And then, that obviously goes into the policing systems, because it's really institutionalized racism that we're facing on all fronts, through the educational system, through the healthcare system. In the prairies, where my uncle was getting treatment, he was escaping from the hospital that had the highest death rate in Canada for Indigenous people, because they were really neglecting the people coming in for help, assuming that, there's so much negligence that was happening within that hospital. He had to leave his home to come over to Vancouver to find just equality in a healthcare system in Canada. And when you talk to people and you let them know what is happening here, the ones that are they don't really have that, those experiences that our friends and family have, they're really taken back, and their world kind of gets turned upside down. They don't understand it because it's so hidden, right? It's been hidden so well for a very long time, but we're coming to a point where the technology that we have and the information that we're able to share, we can't hide it anymore. Canada is really, there's a mirror holding up to Canada, and it's really exposing Canada for all of the injustices that the Indigenous peoples face, and the young people getting educated is so powerful. And then using the education, and like myself, I'm a hip hop artist, so I'm able to connect with my music and speak the message in a different way than sitting down with the youth. I also love to sit down with the youth in that way, but it's just another way that I'm able to communicate and connect with them. So like I said, the times are changing, and I feel like, the shift that is happening right now, I'm hopeful that my children and all of the young children, the indigenous, non-indigenous, we can really change the way that we're living here
Well,
on
and
this
we are
land.
changing some of the narrative. I mean, look, even though I feel like there's a lot of doublespeak that comes out of people like Justin Trudeau and some of these Elizabeth May and a lot of these people, they sound real compassionate, and then you find out, that's what they're saying on one side, and then on the other side they're saying, but these projects got to continue or whatever else. So, but the fact that we do get that language out of them, even if it is somewhat insincere, it gives us a stronger foothold to hold them to it. I mean, when Justin Trudeau tries to tell the United Nations that he wants to incorporate the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples into Canadian law, and then there ends up being this debate on what free, prior, and informed consent means, and same with British Columbia doing the same thing, and then they want to say, yeah, but free, prior, and informed consent doesn't mean veto power, and I'm saying, yes, it does. That's exactly what it means. It means that if we don't consent, a project doesn't go through. But this is the doublespeak. But the fact that they'll try to blow that smoke up our proverbial ass with some of their soft language and their flowery language, we get to hold. That's the mirror that you're talking about sometimes that we hold up to their faces. So, but I think we are accomplishing things, and folks like yourself who are doing some of this good work. There is something to be said for accomplishing things and moving this forward. I do want to mention one thing. You mentioned healthcare. That's another thing that on the U.S. side, everybody has all these these visions of how great the healthcare system is on the Canadian side. And while they do have universal healthcare, there's still a lot of racial bias that presents itself in that, and you can see that in the way Native people our access to healthcare is oftentimes more challenged.
Oh, there's tons, and that's just one of the many issues that we face institutionally. All of the racism that's really embedded in the system. The way that we're looking and the way that we're treating Indigenous peoples, we've been dehumanized for so long. Even at first contact, coming here and assuming authority over the lands through the doctrine of discovery, that's dehumanizing us. That's saying that we're non-human. That right there is the basis and the foundation of what so-called Canada was built on. And so we must, educate ourselves on the real history of Canada that was never taught to us in the schools, and really work together on. It's rebuilding at this point, because what we have is not working within the healthcare system. I've seen it firsthand. I lost my uncle in 2016. I have another uncle right now that I had mentioned that is getting some healthcare out here on the West Coast. But the uncle that I had lost in 2016 was due to negligence in the healthcare system in the prairies. The prairies, Winnipeg, northern, southern Saskatchewan, all of it is just embedded in the system.
Well, and that's
so
not even
really
addressing the mental health issues. I mean, that have been caused by intergenerational trauma and the almost the imposition of drugs and alcohol into our people, and it is something that has been pushed in much the same way people talk about crack cocaine being introduced into the Black communities. That's how alcohol was used. Alcohol was used as a lubricant for treaty negotiations. It was used as justification for residential schools. It was used in such a nefarious way, and we're living with the legacy of some of that fetal alcohol syndrome and intergenerational trauma and addictions that go from generation to generation. So when people think about healthcare, they've also got to understand the mental health issues that are really the direct result of governmental policy.
For sure. And you can see that these policies, this legislation, these laws that are coming from the top are directly affecting the Indigenous youth on the ground, the lack of schooling, and Ottawapiskat and in communities that have never even seen a proper school, that their suicide rates are so high because they can't access services that should be easily accessible to all people of these lands.
Well,
But
and,
they're
it's,
really
and even beyond that, you have the situation where abject poverty has been imposed through governmental policy on the U.S. side and the Canadian side to such a degree that you have a young generation who sees no prospect for the future. So part of it is beyond the mental health caused by intergenerational trauma. You have circumstances where people are living in communities where they see no future. They see nothing, no path forward, and then the only thing they do see is some glimmer of hope that they can pin on escaping. And so so the only solution to our communities is escaping them, and that's why you have the higher suicide and not just individual suicide rate. Look at the suicide pacts that have been exposed over the years, where a half dozen or a dozen, even young girls. It used to be suicide was more prevalent again with males, but now we're seeing even more and more with young men and young women.
Yeah, and it's really it's tough. It's a tough thing that we deal with. But for me myself, as a young person, and my partner, she does power dancing, she does workshops, motivational speaking. We travel as much as we can to these communities to reach these young people, and really empower them, inspire them to not only follow their dreams, but to really follow in the footsteps of our ancestors and picking up the ceremony, the culture, the language, all of these things that are lost. These are the things that as young people we need in our lives for us to feel whole, to feel complete. And sometimes you can't even access those in our own communities. But for us, it's about rebuilding where we can. I have a business, a clothing line that I work with my partner on, and I also help young people pursue business, because we are naturally entrepreneurs. I call it warrior entrepreneurship, because it's doing business in a good way.
Well, and this has to do with offering hope. I mean, it's not just enough to say follow your dreams, but we have to help people, encourage them to dream. And if you are providing some of those tools to help people pursue entrepreneurship, that is the hope that many of our people need.
For sure, I agree, and it's really reciprocal when we go to the communities and we see that there's just so much talent, there's so much knowledge, there's so much wisdom, and these young people, they're smart, they know where they want to go, and sometimes it's just barriers, accessing equipment, accessing, the things that they need to get started. But that's where we're working and doing the work that we can, to help and do our part in rebuilding our communities and restoring, our sense of identity, who we are, the things that were taken from us, learning our languages, and really just, taking that responsibility of caring for the land and caring for each other and doing it in the best way that we can. So that's a lot of the things that we've been doing lately.
Bear, give me
the work out here.
Before I let you go, and we're going to go out with freedom. But before I do that, why don't you give me some of your social media contacts? The way that people can reach out to you. Again, whether it's your pages or what the best way for people to reach out and access not just your music but the work that you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. So on Instagram, it's Dakota Bear Official. On Facebook, it's just Dakota Bear. On Twitter, it's Dakota Bear 1993. So I'm on all social media platforms. Do
you have a website, a specific website? Do you have a website as well?
Yeah. DakotaBear.ca, YouTube, Spotify. I'm on all that. I'm all over social media. So yeah, it's not hard to find me. Just search up Dakota Bear. And also, yeah, thanks, John, for having me and letting me, speak some words tonight, this evening. It was a very good conversation. So I appreciate that.
And we'll do more of this. I'd love to have you back. And again, I'm going to link and promote some of your social media pages as well. I look forward to having you back, and if you ever make it out to the east, maybe we'll even get you in studio. Or I try to provide a platform. I do a show in New York City as well, and we have a venue that is downstairs in a cafe media room, and I can put 100 people in there. And I've had a couple of artists come down and perform in New York City. So if you're ever in this neck of the woods, or I'd love to team up with you.
Yeah, that sounds really good. Yeah, I love that. We'll keep in touch and we'll make something happen for sure.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining me. You give me a much needed break from talking about some of the tensions that have been going on, and I think I needed a guest like you just to help me settle down a little bit. I look forward to having you back, and I do very much enjoy your music. This is Freedom by Dakota Bear. Thank you very much. We'll see you soon.
That's what we've been doing the most. I pack my suitcase and move to the coast. I promise the next time I come to the city, I'm bringing hope. I'm bringing you, and it's bigger than music. Together we started a movement. Together we stand, we shaking the earth as we moving. As soon as you look for the answer, you see the solution. Our minds are as clear as the water as soon as you see the pollution. We want the freedom and not the illusion. We are the warriors, the ones that you read in the stories. We are notorious. I just wanna be me. I just wanna feel free. We just wanna live our lives. We don't wanna.
All right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native, and you were just listening to Dakota Bear joining me for the first half hour, and I really do appreciate the work that he's doing and the music he has produced and performed. He has been in the mix of all the contemporary issues, going back to I Don't Know More to what we're going through right now with battling over trying to resist pipelines, some of the blockades that have been going on. And I want to do a little bit of an update there, because there has been movement here, and some of the movement's a little. I'm to say I'm indifferent is being very, very kind. But if you haven't been following it closely, what's developed over the last several days was the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs, at least some of them, meeting with Canadian ministers, have come to a tentative agreement, and that agreement still requires approval from the Wet'suwet'en people and all of the hereditary chiefs. But in the process of coming to this tentative agreement, CGL has been able to continue their work, which kind of defeats a little bit of the purpose. So we've had blockades all over Canada, rail, highways, and all kinds of other things going on in support of the Wet'suwet'en resisting this pipeline. And there may be a settlement that allows this pipeline to go through, not pursue an alternative route. Now, I'm not going to jump too far ahead. I mean, it's entirely possible that this thing is resisted, but that doesn't appear to be the way that it's going. Now, what's the concessions that came along with, or that they were thrown at these people that could possibly swayed them to approve this pipeline? I don't know. I mean, we can make all kinds of guesses about monetary value, and I know one of the things that when they did their press conference, they kept saying, well, we know going forward we're going to make sure that the land rights issues are this and blah blah blah. But every time one of the reporters asked, yeah, but that's going forward, what about now, what about this? And they kind of skirted the issue. So it sounds like among the concessions that the Wet'suwet'en are trying to get out of Canada and the province has more to do with looking forward and not dealing with this pipeline directly in terms of whether it's approved or not approved. And I got to get back to this notion of free, prior, and informed consent as laid out in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. There ends up being this debate on what does that mean, and I've listened to some of these ministers, both from the federal government in Canada and some of these folks, these politicians from BC, saying, well, that doesn't mean they have veto power, and I say, the hell it doesn't. I mean, if you're suggesting and free, prior, and informed consent is mentioned 6 times in this document, 6 times, and you've got both BC and the Canadian federal government blowing all kinds of smoke up our ass about how much they want to embrace this UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, how much they want to codify it into U.S. law, or I'm sorry, into Canadian law, and then they want to balk at what free, prior, and informed consent really means. I mean, that's troublesome. For one thing, if you're saying that in order to do a project, you have to have, let me break it down again, free, prior, and informed consent. It means free will. It means the people who give consent have to be giving it freely, not coerced, not pressured, not extorted, not threatened. It has to be done freely. Prior means you can't build the pipeline to the doorstep and then say, well, we're here. We've got to finish it. We've already got, financial. You can't build this, you put this plan together, put the pipeline right to our doorstep. That's the whole prior thing. If you're making a commitment to build a pipeline to go through native territories and you haven't gotten our prior consent, then that's your problem. And then there's the consent, free, prior, and informed consent. Informed means that we have to know the whole deal, that we've got to know what's really involved here. Don't blow a bunch of smoke up us about the job creation and and environmental remediation and all other stuff. It needs to be. We need to know exactly what's going to happen, and don't give us this piecemeal environmental impact study either. We need to know what threatens our environment, from everything from the pad you put for your man camps to the roads you're going to put through. How are those roads going to be maintained, and who's going to have the right to travel those roads afterwards? There's a whole lot that gets involved in this idea of free, prior, and informed consent. And then there's the consent part. And this is what gets problematic. And I've talked about this on previous shows. When they put free, prior, and informed consent in this document, they mean consent from the people, not from a couple of people who've been propped up as band council chiefs or even as hereditary chiefs. Look, if you're a community and you don't feel like you have a voice as an individual, and that somebody else has to speak for you, and if that's your culture that dictates that, then I guess it is what it is. But there is no way that when this document is produced and when they say things like free, prior, and informed consent, they're talking about the people. And I've made it real clear. A consensus is not needed to stop a pipeline, but it is needed to approve one. Let me explain that, because I know I posted this up on Facebook and some people were confused by it. It doesn't take everybody to have to be in agreement to stop or prevent a pipeline. It may only take a few individuals, those who are most adversely affected by it, or those who maybe have a little bit more vision about what these things mean in terms of our future. I won't go so far as to say one person should have the power to stop it, but I don't know that they don't. But I will say, in order to get approval, everybody has to agree to it. So in order to have free, prior, and informed consent, that means you have to have free, prior, and informed consensus. Not just from some Canadian politician who sits as a band council chief, or anybody else who is asserting authority or the power to speak for other people. I get really concerned when somebody else says, "I have the authority to agree to this pipeline," not you. Anytime I hear somebody say that's a problem right from the start. And so, I don't know if Frida is approving this. And regardless of who does say the pipeline is approved, if there are a number of individuals who say no, it isn't approved, then that's not a consensus. Then that's not consent. So I have to defer back to the women, especially the women who have been leading the charge on trying to stop this pipeline. And that's not just my view, because I'm going to tell you, even though this tentative agreement has been reached, the blockades are still up. I'm not saying they're all up, but many of them are. I know in Gunawaga they still are. And look, we know that when you do these kinds of things, you are bringing tension down on your entire community. But I've said it before. Nobody needs permission to defend our land or our people, or to step up to defend our brothers and sisters on other territories. When Sogoyeta was on, he talked about this. And when I've had Dagarundage on, he's talked about this. Look, we get caught up into this idea of being a tribe or a nation or a First Nation. We are Ongwe. That means that we are real human beings and that we're all related. Now, look, we have variations in our culture. We have different languages. We occupy different geographical spaces. Not so much with borders. That's a white man thing. But we are all related. And so when people get caught up, well, I'm Seneca, well, I'm Mohawk. Well, no, those words aren't even ours. I mean, they're not even our words. So when we use words like Gunyagahag or Onondawaga, what we're saying is that we're Ongwe, and these are the places that we're connected to from where our people come from. But even those words, they when you break most of our languages down, when we have these words that we use to identify ourselves, it's always the people. Ongwe is the people, original people, real people. Gunyagahaga are the people of the land of Flint. Onondawaga are the people of the big mountains or the mountains or the big hills. Onyotaaga are the people of the standing stone, from the place where the stones stand. So, Dene, Anishinaabe, all these words, at its root, it's the people. It's not a nation. It's not some sort of box that Europeans can define us as. So we've got to remember that we are the original people, and that we are related. And sometimes that relationship may have seemed to have faded because we've allowed ourselves to be not just colonized, but huddled into areas. One of the things that's so inspiring about what's happened out in Wet'suwet'en territory is that when the people realize, look, we can't defend our lands if we're all huddled up in these crappy little villages that Canada has funded, lousy little homes for. If we're not out there living in the bush, if we're not living on that land, in a relationship with the water and with the trees and with the air and all that stuff, if we're not living it, we can't defend it. So what developed out there were people that went and they built camps, they built homes, they built even some level of infrastructure so they could house other people and bring people in and meet and do workshops and all kinds of things like that. That's what's developed out there. And it hasn't been to go out there and clear cut an area and lay waste to the environment so we can live there. Most of the homes that have been built, even a lot of the tiny home issues that have been promoted in some of these communities, it's about making sure that our footprint doesn't tear up the land. Again, you look at most of the communities that we're living in, and they're dismal. As like Dakota Bear was saying, we have these communities where our kids struggle. They struggle with mental health, with health issues, mental health issues, suicide rates, teen pregnancy rates, runaways. And here's the other thing, and I forgot to even mention it while Dakota was on, but here's the part about suicide that becomes double alarming. I mean, it's bad enough that we have them, but this is what both the U.S. and Canada use as a way to write off some of our missing people. Or murdered people. Let's say, oh, well, they just committed suicide. You don't know how often somebody ends up, a body is discovered, and they say, well, it was just suicide, or it was an accident, or it was. They try to write this thing up so they can close the case and not investigate what are the circumstances that led to these deaths. So the fact that we've got people who are so depressed and see so very little hope in the future that they take their lives. That ends up being the cover that Canada and the United States use to wash their hands of some of the deaths that they don't want to investigate. I mean, it just escalates. And look, the solution is for us to understand our relationship to our land. That's what our names mean, right? That's what when we call ourselves, Ongwe, when we call ourselves Onondaga. It means the people of the hills. It means that this is the land. They describe the land and the people who live there. The Gunyagahaga, the people of the land of Flint. Flint was not only a stone that we used, for trade and for tools and that kind of stuff, and for fire. It was something that was prevalent. It described the area that many of our people lived in. So we describe ourselves as real people, and then we describe ourselves within the context of the land. But I'll tell you, if we're huddled up in these crappy little communities with low-income housing, insufficient housing, or ramshackle shacks, I mean, Dakota Bear mentioned Attawapiskat. I dare you to go online and look up Attawapiskat. Look at the housing conditions up there. I mean, you're seeing Native people living in places that you would swear was a third world country in some very impoverished continent. This is Canada and the United States that we have Native people living in these conditions. It isn't. I mean, we're living in third world conditions. Why? Because policy created it. That's exactly why we're living in these conditions. So, while I am somewhat disheartened that it appears that some of the hereditary chiefs are not maintaining a stronger stance against this pipeline going through their territory. Look, it's their choice. I mean, at the end of the day, as we stand in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en people, they will make their choices on what is the best options for them, and perhaps there are concessions that Canada or in the province and the gas companies offer up that convince them that caving in on this pipeline has some longer term positive benefit. I don't know. I mean, it's a choice that they make, and we have to respect that choice. But I will say, when we get the word that they've approved it and that they've allowed it, I gotta ask the question: are we sure they all did, or is this just a few people claiming to have the authority to approve it against the will of the people? That's my concern. And I know this is where it gets difficult. Anytime we try to figure out how people feel, and it connects back here to I wasn't going to mention it, but I'm going to say it even connects back here to the Cayuga situation. What is the will of the people? And do we really have just a few or a handful of people in our communities, in our territories, that get to express and represent that will? I mean, look, U.S. and Canada, they want to talk about being these models of democracy, and they aren't. They aren't. I mean, their democracies are terrible. And in fact, I will go so far as to say that I don't think democracy is the best solution. People always say, well, the Haudenosaunee represents the longest existing democracy. No, we didn't have. Democracy is about majority rule. That means 50% plus one get to rule over 50% minus one. That's not our culture. That's why we don't have elections that are part of Haudenosaunee culture. Look, we've got band councils that have very, very poor turnouts in their election, maybe only 20%. We have tribal councils on the U.S. side, same thing. You might get, a couple of thousand people to vote in a community. Sometimes these elections, I've seen elections in Akwesasne that a candidate wins with a couple of hundred votes. I mean, this is an indication on how much that system we still reject, even as Canada, the Indian Affairs, and on the U.S. side, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, they have no problem accepting the results of some really, really dreadfully poor turnout of an election, because all they want is the next person who could sign a check, the next person who could sign an agreement or a contract, the next person who can give permission for a pipeline to go through. So when we get into this debate about free, prior, and informed consent, we've got to ask that question. Well, we can pretty much understand what free, prior, and informed means, but is there really that much of a debate about what consent is? And do we really have to look to only a few individuals who claim the power, or who have the power because Canada says so, or because the United States says so? This whole idea of federal recognition, whether it's on the U.S. side or the Canadian side, is about the colonial state, the colonial nation state, getting to make a determination on who has the power to speak for an entire community of people. That silences us. That's not consent. That's having an individual make a deal on your behalf, for better or for worse. And I got to tell you, in many of our cultures, and I'll say this as a Haudenosaunee, as an Ongoingwe and Haudenosaunee territory, we have a real prohibition against selling out our lands. I know it's happened, and it's happened for centuries. But there are people who have been cast out from our communities. I mean, I think about even the Trail of Tears, for instance, that is associated with the Cherokee. I mean, many people don't realize, but when the Cherokee were forced out of their homelands, and on that 3,000-mile journey to or however far it was to Oklahoma, maybe it wasn't 3,000 miles, but on that journey to Oklahoma and stuff, and they lost a third of their population, the people who signed that deal, they were all assassinated in Oklahoma. Those people were all killed for what they had done to their people. And we've had, look, that seems like an eternity ago, but it isn't. We have had people who have had to pay the price for selling other people. And then we have some that managed to survive. I mean, I look at some of the folks who've been touted out as these war heroes for code talking. Some of these guys, Peter McDonald was a guy who went to prison for embezzling and misappropriating tribal funds. And yet there he is being touted, carried across the country as the great Navajo code talker. And we've seen that in other places where people are heroized and never really held accountable. Well, it is on us to hold people accountable. So if your band council is selling you out, I looked at some of these letters that have been issued that are condemning people for their actions and that kind of stuff. A piece of paper with somebody signing it saying that somebody has been banished or somebody has been, disenfranchised from a longhouse or whatever. I'm troubled by that stuff because that piece of paper doesn't mean anything to me. I said it before. Nobody needs permission to defend their people. Nobody needs permission to defend their land. And that's not something that necessarily is going to come from a chief, a clan mother, a band counselor, or tribal council president or chairman or whatever the hell else they call themselves. A grand chief. Yeah, that's on the Canadian side, grand chiefs. But no, this is a problem that we have to confront in every one of our communities. And, it oftentimes comes to a head when we do stand up. I'm proud of Kahnawake because in Kahnawake, they are standing with one voice out there as they, put their blockade up in support of Wet'suwet'en territory and in support of Tyendinaga for that matter. I'm proud that they stand there with one voice. Band council, tribal council, longhouses, regardless of what somebody's religious background is or whatever else, the people are standing. Even the people who are involved in as peacekeepers up there, the PKs as they're called, they're not gonna do the bidding of Canada there. And I'm proud to see that level of unity, because I'll tell you, we see it. We've seen it not look that way in some places, and even this stance and this solidarity for the Wet'suwet'en people, even this is taking a bit of a, I'm not saying a U-turn, but it's certainly taking a left turn here, or right turn, I guess. I don't want to condemn left over right, I guess. But it is certainly taking a turn. And I don't know what is going to transpire over the next couple of days and what the Wet'suwet'en people are really going to decide on. But there is some indication that this pipeline is going to continue. And it is continuing today. I mean, the CGNL people do have access, and they are in there working. And, it leaves a lot of us who are holding out and standing up for the defense of that land and the people who are trying to resist the pipeline. It leaves us a little bit scratching our heads. So we'll see how it plays out. I'll certainly let you know how it plays out, from here. I'll use my perch to say as much as I can, but know that at the end of the day, we're going to support, our brothers and sisters in other communities. Even if we don't completely agree with the decisions they make, we know that they do have the right to make some of these decisions, some of them, and we'll try to be as supportive as we can. But like I said, I want to make sure when a decision to allow some of this stuff to happen in these lands, that true consent has been reached, a true consensus has been reached, not just a few individuals claiming to have the power to approve or disapprove these things. That's part of the problem. Hey, we're gonna go out with another Dakota Bear song. This is "Expire" as we expire. So we'll go out with that song. Hey, thanks for listening to the show, and I want to thank again Dakota Bear for joining us on the program. It's been great to kind of have a different conversation. So this is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. We'll be back soon. Yahweh.
You don't know who you been messing with. I'm the man in everything I do legit. Even in my darkest times I never quit. Even when I trip I got a level head. I went to the darkest corner, came back with the devil's head. They been trying to take my rights away, you don't say. We've been out here fighting snakes to this day. This card here, it don't expire. You been tripping, getting high. If you think that you can take this all away, to this day, they been tripping to this day. Who are you? Don't tell me, I don't wanna know. They been doing talking.